fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCAQ 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Joe Goldberg is here.
I'm here. I'm looking at my hazy skies because your Canadian smoke is blocking out my U.S. sun. Thank you very much.
Well, we've got to clean that country somehow.
And Canada's just the country to do it, too.
That's right. You got to clean it out. It's really kind of it's not really smoke, you know.
What is it?
It's really a drug. It's a drug. And you think it's smoke.
And a happiness drug?
Yeah. It's going to be.
It ain't working on me.
Well, you're going to take an extra booster or two, right? You know,
you go out and take some big gulps.
Yeah, you're not an easy, turnover here. That's going to be one
rough
of the.
But lovable.
Yeah, well, if that's what you want to call it.
That was my nickname in the government. Gruff but lovable.
I bet it was.
It was.
Yeah.
I shan't make that up.
Yeah. Well, no.
I said shan't.
Yeah. The Bosch of government. Well, now today we've got another, ex-government man who's in the writing world, and his new book is called Dead Drop, and it's the Handler thriller, and it's book 2. So, Mr. M.P. Woodward, thanks for being here.
Hey, Al. Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Hey.
So, I have to ask, you haven't been on the show before, so how did you get into the writing world? I mean, you have quite the history as being in U.S. intelligence ops and stuff before. And so what got you into the writing part?
Well, my background as a naval intelligence officer certainly informed a lot of how I thought about plots and ideas, but it was really the last decade I spent with Amazon in Prime Video, working in the streaming group where I got to meet lots of screenwriters and showrunners and folks like that. That really made me think a lot more about how to put together a story, how to make a compelling, succinct arc, and how to do a better characterization. So it was sort of a combination of those two things.
Yeah, so do you like the industry? Of course, I don't want you to talk about Prime bad or good or anything. I'm not saying that, but when you were in that part of the industry, do you like the way it is now with streaming rather than the old just basic cable?
I do. I think it's amusing that, we went from having a big cable bundle that cost $150 a month or whatever to now having 15 different streaming services that are all, $5 to $10. But I think the world of on demand is definitely a step forward, and I think being able to choose the content you want is great. And I would say that it enabled and democratized content creation. We went from whatever it was, 50 scripted shows a year to hundreds and hundreds when the streaming services all invest in that. And I think we're starting to see that, pull back a little bit, but I think all that has been really positive for the entertaining, consuming public.
Do you think it puts a lot of pressure on writers, people like yourself, to come up with a lot of content when it's been such a boom?
Well, I think that's a good problem to have for a writer. Frankly, a writer needs a laptop, and that's about it. Whereas a producer needs a whole bunch of things and somebody to back it and a whole lot of money. So I think that is all generally positive. I do think that streaming in general has had something of an impact on the literary world. 20 or 30 years ago, everybody knew when there was, say, a new James Michener book, or a James Clavell book, and they were big, or Tom Clancy, and they were 1,000 pages and that kind of thing. I feel like the attention span or maybe expectations of the entertaining entertainment consumer today has been modified a little bit by streaming. And so now I think the books tend to read a lot more like movies than they used to.
Did being around that world, the streaming world, impact your book writing?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think before, like I was into plot and how would this unfold. But when you get into the presentation of plot, I often visualized it as a screenwriter might, and really thought about, well, how do they do this? How do you advance a story simply by, cutting from one setting to the next, rather than having to explain how everybody got there? A lot of stuff I think in writing can actually be done, quote unquote, off camera. And I think that can help make a story much more succinct and focused. And that's something that I picked up on in the video streaming world.
So now your series, The Handler, this is book 2. Tell us a little bit about what the series is.
Yeah, it focuses on a family, a divorced couple, where the male, whose name is John Dale, is out of the CIA, but his ex-wife has stayed in. And in the first of the series, he's pulled back in effectively because of a problem they have that only he can help solve. So he's forced to work with his ex-wife, and of course there's a lot of tension there. And that focused on getting someone out of Iran. In this second book, it's the same cast of characters, but it's much more focused on Israel and Mossad, and the competition the CIA has with the Mossad, and the different ways that the two spy agencies look at a particular problem, and that puts them in conflict and endangers them. But throughout, I try to focus on this theme, this emotional connection between the two main characters and their daughter, and how that can affect intelligence operations.
Well, that's my next question. Let's stick with the character part. You obviously researched or know about the difficulty of having a family or relationships. I was in the agency. Divorce rate was high. People were always traveling. A lot of interagency relationships because of that. So you obviously were trying to describe that or use that as a character development point.
Yes, I was. Some of this goes back to my earlier career. When I was an intelligence officer, my job was really to collate information coming in from various of America's spy agency resources, right? And so that includes the NSA and the CIA and the various military intelligence services. And so in doing that, you get to know people. And I think that a lot of regular civilians think of this world as being somewhat monolithic or populated with sort of prototypical carriers or characters that are stereotypes. Whereas in my experience, these are all very, very real people. And they are, for the most part, very much doing something that they feel is very honorable, but they have conflicts in their personal lives, as we all do in our professional pursuits. And I simply wanted to portray that. I didn't want to try to write a thriller where the main characters are the president and the secretary of defense, because I haven't worked in the White House, but I have worked with the people doing these things at call it the kind of mid officer level, and I think of them as ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and I really wanted to dramatize that.
How would you describe your relationship then with your characters in this series?
Intimate. Maybe psychologically unbalanced. I don't know how it is for other writers necessarily, but I get very emotional when I'm writing these things, and I think that when I do that actually comes through and is helpful. And I figure that if I can get emotional about them, it's because I care about them and they've become real to me. And if they've become real to me, hopefully they've become real to my readers as well. So it's an aspiration for me to attain that.
Well, where did they come from? How did you develop your characters, or is this, maybe explain that process?
Yeah, I think I started with I started with the idea of a divorced couple, first of all, because I'd seen some divorced couples who'd worked together well. I liked the idea of a strong career woman and all the sacrifices that strong career women make. And I've worked with many over the years who balanced very complicated lives, as single mothers, as executives managing both up and down. So I wanted a strong female character, I think is where this really started. And then to give her conflict in her life, I wanted her, her former relationship to be someone who was different from her, yet they still have something of a symbiotic relationship. So that male character started as a foil for my strong female character, but then he took on a life of his own. And once I had populated those two, I wanted to portray a couple of things. I wanted to make sure that I illustrated that even though we're talking about, important things like national security, everyone still works in a bureaucracy, and that can be frustrating. All of us have dealt with bureaucracy and bosses and people that you don't think see it the right way or have not necessarily their best interests at heart. So a lot of other characters I wanted to illustrate that way, both good and bad.
Well, how do you illustrate character development and change? Do you plot out what you're going to have, what you want them to be, and write the plot around that? Or does the plot sort of exist and you plot your characters along that line?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. I think the plot exists as the center of the wheel, and the characters are the spokes. And each of those spokes rotates around, and each character completes his or her arc. So I definitely try to think about the plot causing a conflict for the characters that they must ultimately resolve, whether they're a bad guy or a good guy. And in so doing, they start the book one way and they end the book another. And if I've done my job right, that happens for all the principal characters, and hopefully with something of an ironic twist as well.
When you have a plot that covers things like national security and nuclear negotiations and things like this, in this conspiratorial culture we have of late, do you ever think about what maybe some of the readers will read into this story or find in the book?
Maybe, and if they do, I think that's a good thing. There are certain themes in these books, and I've just finished the third one, and there are certain themes that I want to get across, and so I hope readers are actually thinking about some of those things rather than just enjoying an action scene. I want that to happen too. I mean, this is ultimately entertainment, but I would like readers to be thoughtful. And in the case of Dead Drop, the book we're discussing now, one of the things I wanted to get across was the differing points of view of the Iranians, the Israelis, and the Americans, and how much each of those is influenced by their own political systems back home. And all that comes to conflict through these characters who are farther down the pecking order. But I hope that readers will actually learn something about this, that they'll learn a little bit about the Israeli point of view, about how Mossad operates, as well as why the Iranians think that they are justified in their pursuit of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons.
Well, what did MP learn about himself going from the first book to the second book? How were you different as of writing a second book?
Yeah, everyone told me. Well, let me say that when Penguin picked up the first book, I had the pleasure of meeting several authors, and it was a multi-book deal for the series. And all these other authors said to me, pretty successful guys, all of them best-selling authors. They said to me, "Hey, your second book, not to put more pressure on you, but the second book is always the hardest one, and you need to hurry up and finish it before the first book launches, because in the year between having gotten a contract and it actually coming out, it feels like nothing happens. But then when the book starts to come out, you're going to be busy. You're not going to have time to write that second book. So I listened very carefully to that advice. I think writing the second book is hard only because somebody's watching you. When you write that first book, you don't necessarily know if, is this just a hobby or is this going to go somewhere? And the second book, people have paid you money. And so you are very focused on getting it right. And so the pressure makes that hard, but it also makes you work harder. And I would say that the thing that I learned is that characterization is just key. The way I see it, you can come up with a plot, but ultimately, the people move the plot in the story. The plot don't move the people. And that's really what I learned in the second book, is that anytime I got stuck, I could rely on those strong characterizations I'd built since the first one and have that push the story forward.
Well, that the editor is that's an interesting, give me some thoughts. So the editor is going to be reading your book. He's looking over your shoulder. He or she's looking over your shoulder. Are the readers looking over your shoulder now as you write your book? Are you thinking about them?
Only in a positive way. I get a lot of encouragement. That's actually been something that was surprising to me was, I guess with social media, everyone's in touch with everyone if they want to be. And, I had a lot of reach outs, just on Facebook or Twitter or from my website. And, some of them 99% of them are super encouraging. And one that stuck out for me was I got a message on Facebook from a gentleman, and he said, I love this book. He was speaking of The Handler. And he said, I really need you to write a sequel, and I need you to hurry up. I'm 93 years old and I live in New Zealand. So I thought, all right, sir, I will hustle up and make sure we get you one. And so here it is.
I'm writing it for you, sir.
Yes, that's right.
Put him in hope you put him in the dedication and the acknowledgments, right?
You're right. I should. That was a miss. I should have done that.
And then afterwards, he writes a bad review.
Yeah, I'm not in the acknowledgments.
No.
Better not. I can get to New Zealand.
So are you thinking about violence on the page when you write it? Or are you conscious, in this ever-sensitive world? Or do you just go ahead and write how you think it should be and not worry about it?
I write how I think it should be and not worry about it. And what I try, like I mentioned, I think that the genre has changed a little bit. In a Jean Le Carré book, there really aren't fight scenes, right? It's all psychological and gamesmanship. And I think in my books, I want there to be that kind of psychology and gamesmanship, but because the genre has changed to an expectation for action, there's also lots of action. And I never lose sight of the fact that this is ultimately entertainment. And if you've done your job right, the action is the culmination of something rather than just being gratuitous set piece. But when I do get to the action, I try to write it as closely as I can from the character's point of view with whom the reader should be identifying. And in that point of view, I think it is a desperate struggle. I think you're poking eyes out and biting and scratching and clawing and using, whatever weapon you can get your hands on. And so I prefer that to be as gritty as possible because I think that's how it would be.
Well, then tell me about your bad guys. How do you create or deal with them as you're creating your good people at the same time? I think, one thing that I try to do with my villains is to make it, because these are really geopolitical thrillers, the villains have motivations that the reader might not agree with, and so I want the reader to root against the villains, but I also want the reader to understand why the villain's doing what they're doing. I don't think it can just be a, twirling the mustache, cutout character who's just, a sociopath or a sadist. I think there's a place for that. It's just, I don't think that that's necessarily this genre. So the villains that I have, I want them to be
capable. I want them to be strong characters, and so that when they show up, their purpose is that the reader feels real fear for the hero, right? Is really worried, and sort of it's a blood curdling moment, just because they know that villain is really capable, and they know that villain's capable largely because that villain believes in what he or she is doing, and they're every bit as good as the protagonist. So that's how I think of them.
Do you actually have a subtext or meaning that you want a reader to get? Whether it is something that develops organically as the story comes together, or perhaps something you put in there. Is there some sort of a thing you want readers to take away besides entertainment?
Without a doubt, and I think it's at two levels. One, I think there's a literary level which is about theme, and that for me, I won't say what they are. I won't say what they are specifically, but a lot of them are rooted in family, and the value of relationships is a big part of the theme of the entire Handler series. So there's that literary aspect, which hopefully gets illustrated through character development and the character arc. But there is also this aspect, because I'm writing about things that are really taken from the headlines. I'm trying to point out areas that I think are dangerous, that maybe aren't necessarily in the news every single day, but merit mentioning. And if I've done my job right, I want my readers to learn something about that situation, or how it's being approached, or potential threats there.
And throughout it, like you talk about how it's centered on family and relationships and stuff. I can't help but think that that's important to you, and therefore you probably have drawn from a lot of your own relationships to put into these characters.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's something that comes with experience and maturity, right? I have children who are 21 and 23 now, married a long time, have been in a couple different careers. And when you think back over when anyone thinks back, I think, over the experiences they've had, the things that they remember are really the people and the experiences they've had with people and shared experiences. And, when you strip away things like material goods or real estate or any other possessions, our most valuable assets are really the relationships that we have. And a big part, I think, of writing compelling fiction has to do with characters experiencing emotion, over relationships, and also wondering how much they can trust people. That's betrayal is something that happens a lot in life and in fiction, and that's a betrayal of trust. And so this question of who can you trust, how much can you trust, I think putting that in an espionage drama or a geopolitical drama is something that brings the characters to life.
Do you think, this is we were at a party, I'd ask you this question, because everybody's got a book inside of them, right? So you say, do you think anybody can write an espionage book or outside their area of expertise? You've lived it. I lived it. We're writing stuff that we know about. Can people who have not lived it write about it?
I think it's a good question.
It's a theoretical question. There's not a yes or a no, because everybody's different, but it's, everybody asks the question to me and I'm like, I don't know, go ahead, give it a shot.
Well, I think writing a fictional drama, writing an arc of a story is it's a job, it's a craft, it's something that can be taught and can be learned. I don't know that most people put a lot of thought into it, but if they did, they could certainly get that part. And when it comes to populating it with things like tradecraft, there is a shocking amount of information available today. People call it open source intelligence, or OSINT. And almost anyone really has access to these kinds of tools. And I think we've seen from journalists who haven't necessarily lived the life of a person they're interviewing or writing about in nonfiction, but they do such a good job of of explaining it and bringing it to life, I think that proves that, you don't have to have lived it to have done it. Whether anybody can do it is probably more a question of dedication and skill.
Well, do you like to write?
Oh, I love to write. I write every single day for a couple of hours at least, and it's what I'm usually thinking about until I'm just wrapping up my fourth book, which is a standalone and is different from the Handler series. I just finished the third Handler book as well, and so it's been a particularly active couple of months for me, and hopefully I will have everything wrapped up to be able to take August off and then get back to work with a fifth book in the fall.
Do you actually keep a series Bible, or do you sort of have a way of keeping track of characters throughout your, let's say, in this Handler series?
A little bit. I think that I keep notes. I keep a running what would I call it? A log, maybe? Basically a document that's open at all times on my computer for ideas as well as how characters might develop. But to be honest, it's never that far from the surface of my mind that much. So I don't think it's that challenging to keep up with my main characters. It might be a little more challenging on plot details or minor characters, or how am I going to connect this to that. That's really where I keep journals and things of that nature.
Well, how do you research? I know you've been a lot of places. Do you go to the other places you haven't been to and scope out locations, or what's your research process?
I do. I was super fortunate in that when I was in the Navy, I was with the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and worked internationally all over the place, really, the Middle East as well as, kind of the Indonesian archipelago, Australia, et cetera. And then later with Amazon, my job took me to 40 different countries as we were opening up distribution for Prime Video. So I have the benefit of having been to a lot of places. That said, my most recent book that I just finished takes, a significant chunk of it takes place in East Africa. And so over the Christmas holidays, I actually went there for 3 weeks. There's some other countries I'm planning on visiting, because there's no substitute for having been there. And my aspiration is to know every place that I'm writing about, to know it fairly well. I think it makes the writing easier, and it makes the story better.
Well, which comes first for you? Is it the location, the plot, or the character? Like, where does it start?
I'd say it's the character, the plot, and then the location. Now that said, that's how I think about it in terms of, like, if I was going to build an outline. But the presentation of the story is often starting with a location, just because you want to start with the character being somewhere or saying something or experiencing somewhere. Hey, they just wiped the grit of the sands of Egypt out of their eyes, right? Like you need to establish that very early in the story, in the chapter or scene. But when it comes to constructing a story, I think it starts with the character.
But it sounds like your location, you write it as a character itself in a way.
In some respects, yeah, I think that's true.
So where do you see yourself going with this? Like, what's next? Obviously, you've written a few other books, it sounds like.
I have, yeah. So in the Handler series, we have Dead Drop now, and then there's a third book which doesn't have an official title, so I won't make one up right now, although I have a working title. And that should come out next year, and hopefully also next year will be this standalone book, which is a little bit more of a military focus, and with a little bit more of a bent to China. And again, it is a standalone book that has nothing to do with the Handler series, but that's what I'm working furiously to complete right now.
So you ever thought about getting out of the genre at some point, going into To Kill a Mockingbird or something like that, or it could be military geopolitical thrillers?
I sure have. And I think you have to earn your way into that, right? If you got into the NFL as a kicker, but you really wanted to be a quarterback, well, you got to kick first, and earn your place on the team, and then work on your arm. And I think that's where I'm at. There's definitely things that I would like to explore, particularly thematically and emotionally, that aren't necessarily what you'd consider to be in spy thriller land. But as I said, I know I need to earn that right with readers and with my editor.
Well, what makes a good book for you?
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
What makes a good book? I think super strong characterization. If I feel genuine emotion when the hero is threatened, then I think it's a good book. I also think authenticity and believability. For me, that's important. I have enjoyed the occasional fantasy genre, Game of Thrones types of things, but that's not what I'm writing. And so I think for it to feel super compelling, it needs to feel very authentic and as though, hey, this could have really happened. And so that's what does it for me.
I get people ask me, hey, what classes and training did you take to be a writer, and what should I take? And I'm like, I don't know. I just started to write. Did you take any formal training yourself, or have any ideas of doing that as you move on to the next step in your writing career?
You know what? I oddly enough, when I was with the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, I had this job for about 3 years where I wrote war games. And not only did I write the war game scenarios for this vast command, spread across the Pacific, I then had to generate all the message traffic and all the things that these various units spread around the world would react to in an exercise. And so in doing that, I mean, I kind of got into it. I enjoyed having a big scenario. I enjoyed portraying various reactions from other governments, other units, and that kind of thing. So that started it for me almost as like plot training. And then in terms of honing the language and the prose, I had an unusual training ground in Amazon where, as an executive at Amazon, that culture rather famously relies on the written word. PowerPoint is not allowed at Amazon. Everything's done, via a document. The document can't be longer than 6 pages. Your career sort of hinges on writing these documents. And so I think successful executives at Amazon are also pretty good journalists. And I got a lot of that training there and a lot of writing and rewriting and really thinking about how to portray ideas while doing that job.
Well, you got out of the government time because you can be replaced by AI now. They can do all those war games.
Well, that would be convenient, If I could start there, yeah, maybe I would give it a try. I do think AI is super. Its significance can't be overstated. I think it's huge. But I also think that it's been with us for longer than anybody seems to talk about. I mean, if you think about Alexa, which launched in 2014, what is that other than an AI engine? And so this has been evolving for quite a while. I think it's just one of those moments when it broke into the consumer consciousness with ChatGPT that all of a sudden everybody's really thought where this could be headed. But many people have been thinking about it for a long time.
What's your thought on the ChatGPT? I mean, isn't it just kind of like computerized plagiarism in a sense?
I think it is a super efficient way to organize all the information that you could go get on the internet and then presenting it in a way that is convenient and consumable for a regular person. And I think that's the magic of it. If you play around, I'm sure, you've played around with it, but it's a garbage in, garbage out kind of model, right? If it can go and collect all kinds of stuff sometimes, which is wrong or incomplete because it's getting whatever is out there. So I think it is. I think its commercial reality will be that it will be the next version of search. It seems pretty clear to me that this is what Google and Bing will become fairly quickly. And if you think about what Google has done is, they're the guys, whether you know it or not, that indexed and organized the entire internet. And so I think that they'll continue to do that, as will a couple of other companies. And the presentation of the internet will become more interactive through things like ChatGPT and other AI tools.
Yeah, world's changing. Now, speaking of that, do you have a big presence on social media? Do you have a web page? How do you like to interact with readers?
Yeah, I have. I have a website, mpwoodward.com, and also on Facebook at mp.woodward, and of course Twitter at mpwauthor. Facebook is where I find most of the thriller readers are, and the followers there kind of really blossomed over the last year or two, a lot more than I thought they would, and very organically. So that's super gratifying. On Twitter, I find that it's that there's some interaction there as well, but a lot of times it's with other people in the writing community. Quite frankly, I also keep up with a blog. You mentioned things like AI, and we talked a little bit about other geopolitical problems. Where when I'm doing my research, I try to about once a month highlight an article to show, hey, here's something that's going on in the world that you might not have seen. And I like to share those on LinkedIn as well as on my blog. But I often try to relate them back to my tech career and current business.
Well, of course, we'll put everything up on the website so people can find you with one easy click, and appreciate it. And you ever find yourself writing a story and halfway through you kind of get like a block and you don't know where to go?
That happens to me about every 3 days. Yeah.
Do you have a system for getting out of it, or are you able to put something down and move on to a different book or a different story?
No, I'm generally one story at a time, but I would say that I have two, well, maybe three ways to do it. One is, I try to stream of consciousness, just sit there and write and ask myself questions. Well, why would this happen? Well, why would that happen? So that you're logging exactly what you're thinking in real time. And a lot of times that'll resolve it. The other thing that will resolve it is just stepping away from it for a day or two. And I like to read a lot of nonfiction, particularly things related to research, but I also love to read historical biographies, because when you're reading those, you realize, hey, here have been extraordinary people who have been faced with things that they've overcome one way or the other. And I don't know why, but that has a tendency to make me think a little bit more openly and get out of the mental box I've created for myself.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Well, we certainly had a pleasure having you on. Learned a lot. Now I can write a book and be successful.
Just have chat do it, man.
Somewhere between the two, I'm sure you're right.
Yeah. So our guest, his new book's called Dead Drop, and it's a handler thriller. It's book 2. MP Woodward, thank you for being here.
Alan, Joe, it's been my true pleasure.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.